GoForThe2.com. We're into the week 2 predictions. We got off to a rough start, week number 1, but there are some great games. Week number 2, it starts at 12 o'clock. Louisville at home against Houston. A lot of analysts and experts putting a lot of weight into Louisville's second half performance over the Auburn Tigers. They trailed big early in the first half. They cut that margin to 31-24, and I think a lot of people are expecting the momentum to carry over into week 2. But this is a dynamic Houston Cougar team led by a very solid quarterback in Greg Ward Jr. He's a dual-threat quarterback, threw for 275 passing yards last week, rushed for 101 yards, accounted for 3 total touchdowns. Houston's led by former Ohio State offensive coordinator Tom Herman. I think this matchup favors Houston in this game. Not sold on defensive coordinator Todd Grantham. He comes over from Georgia where he ran a very sophisticated defense. Kids could not react. They had to think too much, and I think you're going to see that in this matchup. Look for Tom Herman and that offensive staff to confuse Grantham at home. The Louisville defense is very big. They're very solid, but they have problems running sideline to sideline, and I think that's where the edge in this game holds to Houston. I think Greg Ward exploits that defense, and I'm calling for the upset on the road. Houston gets a hard-fought 38-35 victory on the road in Louisville Saturday at 12 o'clock. Another interesting matchup, Iowa on the road to Iowa State in Ames. Last 3 games have been decided by 12 points. Last year, Iowa led 13-0 in that matchup before Iowa State struck the victory late in the fourth quarter. I think Iowa will be in this matchup. It's a rivalry game. More importantly, it's on the road. I think that favors Iowa. I think they'll be focused. I like C.J. Beathard in this matchup going up against the Iowa State secondary. That defensive front by Iowa, very solid last week, led by Drew Watt. Very solid performance over Southern Illinois at home. I think it carries through to week 2. You look at Iowa's schedule overall. They don't play Ohio State. They don't play Michigan State, no Michigan. I call for Iowa at the start of the year to be a sleeper in the conference. I'm expecting them to win their division and go to the Big Ten championship game at the end of the year to face Ohio State. I think it all starts this week in a rivalry game against Iowa State, and I look for C.J. Beathard to exploit that secondary, and I think Iowa gets a hard-fought 31-17 victory over Iowa State on Saturday. Game starts at 4:45 Eastern Time. Another game that's very interesting, Bob Stoops and Oklahoma on the road in Neyland Stadium to face Tennessee. Very interesting matchup. Oklahoma 0-4 against top 25 competition last year. They beat up on Akron late in the game. Were winning that ball game 17-3 at half before pulling away, but Akron played very well defensively. Baker Mayfield now makes a road start, hasn't made a lot of road starts since transferring from Texas Tech, doesn't have a lot of big game experience. That's a cause of concern for me. I also look at that secondary by Oklahoma. Last year, they gave up 276 total yards per game to their opponents in the secondary. Can Joshua Dobbs exploit that secondary at home in Neyland Stadium? I think he can. There's a dynamic offense by Tennessee that put up 604 total yards last week, 399 on the ground, led by Jalen Hurd with 123 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. More importantly, you look at that game last year in Norman, trailing 27-10, Tennessee had an opportunity to score midway through the fourth quarter. Instead, they were on the 5-yard line of Oklahoma through a 102-yard interception return. That changed the momentum of the game in the fourth quarter. If Tennessee punched it in, it would have been a 10-point game midway through the fourth quarter. I think this is a much more mature, focused Tennessee team. I wanted to see them how they responded week number 1 against a solid Bowling Green team. They came out, they were very good offensively, a little lackluster defensively, but this was a team in 2014 that held opposing quarterbacks to under 54% completion percentage. They held Matt Johnson to 56.5%. They're going to need that type of effort against Baker Mayfield. I think they get it done. I like Butch Jones. I have confidence that he has the right game plan in place, and I look at that atmosphere in Neyland Stadium. Tennessee numbers-wise, this is a dynamic stat. Tennessee is 1-26 since 2010 against top 25 competition. Numbers favor Oklahoma, but I like the way this Tennessee team is playing. I like Butch Jones at home in this spot. I think a lot of pressure on Oklahoma and Baker Mayfield. I'm putting my confidence in Joshua Dobbs at home. I think Tennessee gets a 2-touchdown victory in this matchup. I think they get the 34-20 victory at home in Neyland Stadium to propel the Volunteers to the 2-0 record to start the 2015 campaign. Another interesting matchup, marquee game, Saturday night, 8 o'clock, Oregon travels to Michigan State. Last week, Oregon put up 485 rushing yards against Eastern Washington. You look at Michigan State on the road against Western Michigan. They allowed a lot of passing yards to Zach Terrell, 365 total yards passing in that ball game. Corey Davis stepped up, had a big day. But how much will Michigan State miss Pat Narduzzi in this game? I know they're going to want to pound the football with L.J. Scott and Mondre Hill, but this is going to be a tough ball game for Michigan State. You look at defensively, very solid in the interior, only gave up 18 rushing yards last week to Western Michigan in the rushing game. They only gave up 88 yards last year as a whole per game, but they can't run sideline to sideline. That secondary had some issues with Western Michigan's passing attack. That's what I look at, the mismatch going up against that Oregon scheme. I think Oregon out-schemes Michigan State in this matchup. I know Connor Cook is a solid quarterback. He was under 50% last week, 15 of 31. I like Vernon Adams, and I like the schematic of Oregon in this matchup to run sideline to sideline. I think they mix things up and exploit Michigan State in the secondary. I think it's very high scoring, but I think Oregon gets the road victory 41-34 over Michigan State and Connor Cook. Just don't think Michigan State has the weapons offensively to keep up with Oregon in this matchup. I think if they start fast, it could be a long day for Michigan State, but it should be a very entertaining game to say the least. Another interesting game that I'm looking at, Virginia at home against Notre Dame. Virginia 4-9 since 2010 against top 25 competition. Notre Dame with a dynamic victory at home against solid defensive team in Texas and Charlie Strong. They held that Charlie Strong offense to only 8 total first downs, 160 total yards of offense. They held that Texas Longhorn offense to 2 of 13 on third down conversions. But I was very impressed with Virginia on the road against UCLA. They trailed that game at halftime 17-9. I like their quarterback, Matt Johns. I like Quan Blanding in the secondary. I think this is going to be a tough matchup for Notre Dame. I think they get the victory, but I think it's very, very close. I think Notre Dame wins this game by 7 points. I think Virginia is in it from start to finish. I don't think it's high scoring. I think it's a methodical Notre Dame victory, 27-20 over Virginia. I think it's very, very close in Charlottesville. Look for Mizell to have a big day. Look for Mike London to run the football. And I like what Virginia has to keep this game close. I think it's a 27-20 Notre Dame victory on the road. Another interesting matchup takes place a little bit later in the night, 10:15 start. Boise State and BYU. You look at Boise State overall. Boise State, methodical victory at home against Chris Peterson in Washington. It wasn't pretty. They fought it out. They led early on in that matchup, had to hold on to Jake Browning in Washington overall. Now they travel to Provo, where BYU is coming off an emotional victory in Lincoln, Nebraska. Boise State, I expect them to be in this matchup. They're disciplined. They're ready. And this is going to be a tough spot for BYU. Taysom Hill is down. They're coming off an emotional victory over Nebraska. And I think Boise State gets a solid 7-point victory on the road. I don't think it'll be easy, but I like what Boise State showed me last week in terms of grinding out that victory. Not sure BYU will be in this matchup in terms of an emotional effort. I know they're coming off a monumental, dramatic win, but I'm expecting a letdown right here this coming week. I think Boise State gets a hard-fought victory. I think it's anywhere in the area of 7 to 10 points. Think they get a 30-20 victory on the road in Provo. Think it'll be methodical early, but in the end, Boise State gets a hard-fought victory. Should be a very interesting weekend of college football. This is why we talk about the games. There's nothing better. Stay with me all season long.